Hi, everybody. I am the world-renowned historian, and I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Let's talk about Star Trek. Alright, what it do, Internet? It is I, your world-renowned historian. We are back here with some world-renowned reviews. We are back here with the debut episode of the TNG project. I am super excited to start watching Star Trek The Next Generation. I never have before. Super excited to, view and review it. I'm super excited that you're here. Thanks for watching. God, I hate all that YouTube shit you're supposed to say. Go, like, comment, sub. If you want to do all that, that's cool. If you don't, it's your Google account. Do what you want with it. Anyway, in case you're new here, in case you forgot the rules of the game, I'll put a link to the intro video into this video's description. Basically, long story short, I am a huge lifelong sci-fi and fantasy fan, and I have never seen one single episode of Star Trek television. So, I'm going to watch all of Star Trek The Next Generation and review it basically in real time. Like, I'm going to stop it in the middle of the episode and give my thoughts on what's happening. I have no script, I have no notes. I'm just going to react to it as it happens, and then I'm going to post it on the internet. It's just the internet. Who cares, right? Just say that to yourself. Breathe deep and just say that to yourself. It's just the internet. Anyway, without further ado, let's just jump in. We are reviewing Encounter at Farpoint, the debut pilot episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. First aired September 28th, 1987. And by the way, that buzz in the background, that's my air conditioner. Sorry, I'm not turning it off for this episode. Sorry, not sorry. It's July, so you can either have that sound or have me be very shiny with sweat. You take your pick. I know which choice you would take. So this is a longer episode than normal. It looks like it was probably 2 hours on television. I honestly don't know if it aired as a single unit, or if it was like 1 hour 1 week and then the next hour on October 4th, I guess it would have been 1987. But yeah, this one, which I think they were somewhat famous for, is a 2-part episode, and I haven't started it yet, but I'm looking at the thumbnail where now I see it does in fact say Encounter at Farpoint Part 1 and 2. Looking at the thumbnail, it doesn't look like a sci-fi show, and it looks like the Borgias or something. It's a man in like a the Queen of Hearts suit from Alice in Wonderland, or maybe like Michael Palin dressed as the Spanish Inquisition in Monty Python, and he's got like a carved like eagle behind him or something, and he's sort of reclined in a chair. And it kind of makes me wonder if Amazon Prime like mixed up the thumbnails, but anyway, let's get going. All right, so I am 22 minutes into the episode. So far, it's really good, honestly. Like, the writing's really much better than I expected. The performances are all very strong. I'm enjoying it so far. I guess my first note is that this really doesn't look like it was made in 1987. It looks like certainly doesn't look like a TV show from 1987. It looks like a movie made in that age, that era. You think about like, I don't know, like Family Ties or like Fraggle Rock or Married with Children. Like, this show does not look like that. I associated this when I was a kid because I wasn't a fan. I associate it much more with the 90s than I did the late 80s. And it really surprised me when I heard that this was made in 1987, just looking at the production values, because it honestly looks like a major Hollywood production from that era. But in any case, we start on, Picard going space, the final frontier, which I think followed Kirk from the earlier show, which at the time was probably an amazing callback and probably like blew people's minds. But Then we cut to this huge ship, the Enterprise, like flying through space. It's always basically like naval battles in space. I think that was Roger Ebert that made that observation, that anytime you see like spaceships fighting, it's never treated as like aircraft. It's always like a naval battle kind of thing. But in any case, Picard gives his captain's log, which I think is another callback to the Shatner series, which, unless I'm mistaken, was the only Star Trek property before this one. But he gives the captain's log, and he says they're going to the frontier. Debon 4, I think he says, they're going to go examine Farpoint. Picard is new to the Enterprise. He's walking onto the bridge, and the actors are kind of reaching out and poking various things on the set. We hear Picard say that there's no first officer yet, and he name checks one William Riker, who obviously fans are very familiar with. He says that they're going to meet him on Deneb 4. We get some stuff with Data learning new stuff about humans that kind of like sets up that relationship, where Data's like this, almost kind of like this C-3PO type, where like he knows all these things, but he also misses like certain social cues. And I know from the couple movies I've seen, they get a lot of mileage out of that, but it's interesting to see them set that up in his very first scene also. So he says they're going to solve the mystery of Farpoint. There's an unnamed lady who I learned just from utilizing Amazon Prime's settings that is Counselor Deanna Troi. She's sensing essentially disturbances in the Force. She's sensing bad things about where they're going. I have no idea what accent she's doing. It's like vaguely Russian. I couldn't tell you, but... And then they run into a force field. It obviously doesn't look as good as modern CGI effects would, but for the time, it looks fantastic. This does not look like an 80s TV show. It looks like an 80s movie. So then, like, the Merchant of Venice, like, teleports onto the ship. It's a guy in, like, a floofy, like, Medici hat. Like he's like a Renaissance guy. It was very silly. He talks like Shakespeare. He's thou and thy and thou art. And he basically says that the humans need to go back to their solar system. And this character says that we call ourselves the Q. And then he freezes a dude, and that dude falls down. And so this character calling himself Q looked very familiar to me. But I very quickly realized that's John Delancey, who I last saw having a beer with Walter White at a bar, and then causing two airplanes to crash into each other because he was distraught over the death of his daughter. But yeah, I first saw John Delancey well after probably the role most people know him for. It's a very silly performance he's giving. He's chewing, devouring the scenery. It's great. I love exaggerated kind of goofball performances, and it's a lot of fun, honestly. Like he's doing a great job. But and then anyway, Q turns into a World War II general. If he knew that existed, why did he start as the Renaissance guy? Obviously Picard would be more familiar with things closer to his own time, so why did he start with something further away from his own time? Kind of silly. I don't know. I'll allow it. But they say something about the commies, which was relevant, I'm sure, in 1987. There's kind of like a interesting, like, progressive streak in the politics of the show where he's like, 400 years ago, you were killing each other over tribal gods. Yeah, it's an interesting sentiment for 1987, for sure. And then they add some, kind of more world-building aspects where they have some speculative things where they, like, imagine what the 21st century would be like. And it's this guy in kind of like this weird, like... it's Q, but he's in, like, a padded, weird, like, conquistador hat. And he's, like, using drugs to, like... I don't know, like, keep them obedient or something. But, I don't know. It was interesting in the way that they were like, okay, here's the actual history. And then we're going to have some for the time that the show was made, future history, but in the past from the show's timeline, if that makes sense. I always like that kind of element that they added. Anyways, yes, John Delancey's performance as Q is hilarious and very silly, but also really good, largely because of the excellent writing. You know, he's doing all these goofy accents, but the content of what he's saying is actually really interesting and kind of sinister when he's talking to Picard. But anyway, so it's Picard's first day, and he comes onto the bridge, and he's like, we're going to take the engines to maximum power when they run into the force field. And Data's like, no, man, bad idea. No. Basically, Picard's like, well, what if we just, like, go to full throttle? And then Data's like, yeah, it's never been done. You know, we probably shouldn't risk it. And Picard's like, well, what about theoretically? Data's like, there's, like, a 1 in a million shot that it'll work if we're, like, perfect. And Picard's like, good enough. So then Q is like this ball of fire / force field ball chasing them as they flee. Picard asks Troy what they met, and she's like, well, it didn't feel like a mortal being. And then Data again tells Picard that he really shouldn't go faster, and Picard's just like, screw it, shoot him with the torpedoes. So they go into something called saucer maneuvers, which I assume means the big, like, dinner plate part of the ship, like, comes off, and they, you know, navigate separately. But next we get another captain's log where the families and such on the ship go to a safe place. Why are there families on, like, a warship? Does that make sense? It's like if, like, on some, like, aircraft carrier in the modern age, they have, like, a bunch of kids they gotta, like, rush off to safety. What are they doing on that ship? Anyway, they shoot a bunch of torpedoes at Q. The ships separate, and the big dinner plate part flies away from the main section. I'm guessing this was probably kind of a big deal with regard to the William Shatner series, like whether it happened or not. Like either that never happened, so therefore it was a big deal, or it happened and it was a callback. But anyway, Warmonger Lieutenant Yar is like, kill it, let's shoot it. And Picard's like, no, it's going to waste us if we try. Somebody tells Picard that they've stopped, and Picard tells them, thank you, comrade. Soviet Union, baby! Anyway, the force field catches up to them, and Picard surrenders. And the four of them, Data, Yar, Troy, and Picard, all get teleported into this weird, like, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome kind of setting. Like, there's a guy dressed like a Chinese emperor, and he's saying, like, the prisoners better stand. And Picard sits down. They say it's mid-21st century, which is, like, around the corner, weirdly, but they also say it's, like, post-atomic horror, which is pretty cool. You know, I always like that faked future history based on, you know, what their projections were at the time. And then we get one of the coolest shots ever. It's Q coming out as Judge under a spotlight, and it's like part Apocalypse Now, like part A Clockwork Orange, part Caligula, part Alice in Wonderland. It's so great. He's like being carried out on this litter in the weird outfit I talked about, you know, in the beginning of the episode. It's just this amazing shot. It's Q as the judge and all this, like, red and black. It just looks so cool. Okay, so there's a trial happening. Q is the judge, and the Enterprise crew is standing in for all the crimes of humanity. So Lieutenant Yard essentially overpowers one of the guards and, like, takes his gun. And Q tells the guard who fought with Lieutenant Yard that he's out of order. And then another of the guards kills him, and he does some, like, drugs before he dies. Kind of an interesting, again, like, future history thing, like, telling you where society was headed. And he says the prisoners won't be harmed until they're found guilty. And then the guard dressed like an emperor is like, they have to answer for all the crimes of all humanity ever. So they're kind of doing that thing. We're like, humanity sucks, but then Picard's standing in for, like, no, actually, humanity's pretty good. They have a brief argument based on case law, and Q is like, in 2779, we stopped being unified, and we get a little character development from Yar, which is actually pretty well written, where she's like, the Federation saved my life, and, like, she obviously had this, like, bad upbringing, and she was kind of like a tough kid, and then Q, like, freezes her. So again, the basic point is that, like, mankind sucks, but Picard is, like, pleading on their behalf. Q says that he has to answer guilty to the charges, or that they're going to have the guards kill him. Picard does plead guilty, but he asks for like a provisional kind of thing. Like he has to be like tested in their current mission. Basically, if the crew of the Enterprise does good on this mission, it'll be like a test case for mankind kind of thing. And there's another spectacular shot as Q like fades back kind of into his hole. It's really what it feels like. It's like this. He's like this monster like coming out of the darkness, and then when he fades back into it, it's sort of like this anteater like sliding back into his lair. Anyway, they get teleported back to the bridge, and literally no time has passed. Colm Meaney, yes, that Colm Meaney. Even if you don't recognize the name, I promise you've seen this dude. Talks to them, and he says, oh, it's going to be boring to go to Farpoint. And Picard and all the others share like this knowing glance, and they're like, no, it's not going to be boring. And anyway, my dude Riker shows up on Farpoint. So I only know Jonathan Frakes from this and a couple other like TV series that he hosted like as himself. I've always known him as looking like Tim the Toolman Taylor's sidekick, Al Borland. It was weird seeing Jonathan Frakes not look like Al Borland from Home Improvement. Like he having like movie star good looks. Like dude looks like Cary Grant in the 80s. It was crazy. He's having a meeting with the leader at Farpoint, whose name is Zorn. Frakes comments about how it's strange that they have everything, and how he's been treated so luxuriously, and how that's odd. It's kind of an interesting thing happening here with the writing, where Riker is like, I'm not mad that you're rich and you have all this plenty, but like I don't really believe it. Like you shouldn't. You're out on the frontier. Like this doesn't make any sense. It's interesting because like I guess I don't necessarily understand the relationship between the Galactic Federation and other planets. It feels vaguely like Imperial versus colonizer. Like these other planets aren't part of their country, so to speak. They aren't part of like the Federation, which is why that whole like Prime Directive thing exists, where like, oh, we can't like screw with development on their planet or whatever. So I don't really understand like how that relationship works, but they see that other people have less than them, and they're like, I think you should have less because you're in a resource-poor environment, and it sucks to be you that you happen to be born here. Anyway, Zorn offers Riker some fruit, and he says he'll be happy to take some if there's an apple. And he says that, sorry, we don't have any apples. Symbolism. But then suddenly there's apples! Whoa! Zorn says that Riker just didn't see him before. Riker is skeptical, perhaps with good reason. And then Riker leaves, munching on his apple. Again, symbolism. And then Zorn gets mad at the air, basically. He's yelling at somebody at Farpoint Station. We don't know who the hell he's yelling at. He's like, we've told you about doing this. You are going to make them suspicious. That's how he talks. We get an exterior that looks legitimately great. It's this like wonderful like desert sunset. It's got this sort of like Tatooine, or honestly like some of the exteriors in Spaceballs sort of quality, where like it's obviously the era before like solid CGI, but it looks fantastic. We meet Dr. Crusher and her son Wesley, who I know the internet hates this character. The internet hates Wesley Crusher, and I'm not immediately sure why. As far as I know, so far he's just some kid. He's just some teenage kid. But they all say they're going to the mall. Riker says he was very, very weirded out by the sudden appearance of the apple, and Crusher is initially very skeptical. She's like, "Oh, you stop worrying," but then she's looking at cloth at the shop, and she finds exactly what she was looking for. So there's weird shit happening here. Crusher buys all the cloth, even though Wesley, if you will, knows that it was not there moments before. So they, the Crushers and Riker say goodbye. LaForge shows up. He's summoning Riker to beam up. Again, there's that awesome, wonderful desert background. Riker does beam up, and he chats with Yar for a second about the saucer being gone, and he has a little, oh, what am I walking into? And Picard shows him some of the greatest hits from the last 20 minutes of the episode. So then Picard has Riker conduct a manual docking of the saucer bay because they've met again. The dinner plate side of the ship and the bottom part with the engines met again. So Picard has him do a manual docking. And this scene is very weird and pointless. It seems like a strange excuse to like get like fake tension into the show. Like, why in the world would you have Riker do a manual docking maneuver when you have your auto systems up and running? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Unless it's just to get like Riker over as like a competent commander. I don't know. It reminded me a little of like the scene in Interstellar when Matthew McConaughey's character is like, he's trying to match the, spinning inertia of the ship that just part of it just exploded, and he's trying to dock with it. But that scene's got like real tension because he's like, if I don't do this, then we all die. Where Riker is just doing it because Picard told him to, for no good reason. I don't know. It was very, very strange to me. At the end of the scene, like all the characters all like excited, like, yeah, we did it. And it's like, you didn't have to do it. It was just a random ass scene. I don't know. It was very silly to me. But next scene, we get Picard and Riker, and Picard's like stirring his tea, and he's just like, oh, that was very routine. He's, downplaying it. And they have a chat where Riker talks about like how he's willing to discount his captain's word if it means looking out for his safety. And the writing here is actually really good. Like, this is actually very good dialogue. They're kind of setting up their relationship, you can see, for the rest of the series. And Picard kind of comes around to it. It's almost like he was like testing him. He's like he talks about how with his previous captain, Riker was like, would discount his word in order to keep him safe. And he's just like, oh, well, don't you think the captain would know better than you? And Riker's like, no, I don't think that at all. So then Picard kind of like comes around and he's like, well, I need you to like check me in that way too. But in like a strange, different way. It's not like in dangerous situations. Picard like wants him to help him deal with children. It's not like an action situation. It's just Picard is just like, hey, when I talk to children, I can't be like a human being. So I need you to help me project a congenial, atmosphere or whatever. Demeanor, I guess, is a better word. It's very strange. But I see they're kind of setting up Picard to be like this like ultra competent dude who just like has weird antisocial quirks. Next we get Dr. Crusher and Geordi, and this scene basically exists to set up Geordi's like visor gimmick. They're talking about like how he's been blind his whole life, but the visor lets him see like much of the electromagnetic spectrum. And you get some decent character stuff in here, but like, yeah, that's the whole reason it exists, is to set up Geordi. And then Riker comes on the bridge and he's looking for Data, and Data's not there, and it's the Klingon guy. I can't remember his character's name. It's Michael Dorn. Worf. Worf is like, oh, he's transferring an admiral. And then it cuts to Data and the admiral, and it is DeForest Kelley, who played Bones in the original series. So you get this wonderful, like, passing the torch moment. The scene plays no role in the story whatsoever. It's just an excuse to have Bones there. And we see that, he's an admiral now, and you just get this wonderful character interplay between them. Like I said, it doesn't advance the story whatsoever, but it's just awesome, just because of how cool the two characters are and how good the dialogue is. Top notch. All right, so we see Q again. He's on like their viewing screen, which is also like their cockpit window to like look outside on the bridge. Worf is like about to like shoot at him, but Picard stops him. And you get kind of a little interesting character moment where Riker is like, you reacted fast, Worf. And Picard's like, oh, but you reacted futilely. But then he kind of like softens, and that was exactly what Riker was asking him to do earlier, was like kind of check his behavior. And Picard is kind of like comes around and he's like, okay, you weren't that dumb. You were fine. It's okay. It just kind of shows their difference in leadership styles and just how he was doing exactly what Picard asked him to do. There's just so many great shots here and just such awesome character work. Picard gets another captain's log where you learn like he's kind of almost this sort of like philosopher king, like this kind of like Marcus Aurelius type figure. In fact, I am going to lean into that comparison. Picard is Marcus Aurelius. So Riker and Picard discuss Riker's theories about where the folks at Farpoint are getting all these resources for all, these splendors they're building. Riker's theory is that they're trading the geothermal energy that their planet produces for, construction materials and resources, and then using that to create, this sort of paradise of plenty. And then, moments later, Troy and Riker lay eyes on each other. And it's on like Donkey Kong. It's obvious they've met before. She calls him Imzadi or whatever. I know they're a thing based on the movies, but yeah, it's an adorable reunion and a very adorable, like, meet cute. There are some amazing exteriors that only exist in films and TV made in the 1980s. And some of them are in this TV show. There's the establishing shots before our crew from the Enterprise is meeting with Zorn, is the example I was thinking of. So it's Troy, Picard, and Riker in this meeting with Grappler Zorn. The writing here is actually really great and very kind of subtle, and there's a lot of subtext behind it. Basically, the long and the short of it is they're trying to force him to explain why his base is so rich in resources, and he is like kind of subtly telling them that if they keep pressing him, and this isn't the like actual context of what he's saying, but it's what he's really saying, is that they keep pressing him, he's going to go against them and, ally with their enemies, so they should just shut up and leave well enough alone. And he couches all this in this, very sort of happy, positive dialogue. But then Troy the empath starts feeling like pain and loneliness and despair from somebody. It's not coming from Grappler Zorn or any of his people, and it's not coming from any of the Enterprise crew. So who could it be? I feel like this is the plot of like multiple different D&D games I've played in. Again, dude is like, hey, we're gonna ally with the Ferengi if you don't shut up about this. And I don't know what the hell a Ferengi is. I don't really follow Star Trek, but Picard is like, cool, they're gonna eat you. Love it. And then Riker is looking for Data, and he asks this tiny little ensign for help, and she kind of giggles at him, and basically uses a Siri to find him. Seriously. It's Siri-level technology. Anyway, when Riker goes looking for him, he tracks him down to what amounts to like a nature preserve on the Starship Enterprise. So the door into the nature preserve actually looks super cool. Like it's like floating in space, kind of like that door in the Neverending Story, in the book at least. I think they left it out of the movie, but anyway, it vanishes once Riker walks through it. And then he's calling out looking for Data, and he walks across some like shaky rocks set up for later. He's hiking up into the forest where he finds Data whistling Pop Goes the Weasel, and then he finishes the whistle. I don't know, I can't whistle. Riker tells Data that he's needed at the base, and then we get a lot of great character stuff with Data. I'm not going to give a blow-by-blow of the dialogue of the scene, but it is a great scene. Wesley shows up, and he falls in the water, and he's rescued by Data the robot, who lifts him over his head with one hand, and Wesley's like, whoa! They come back out, and they meet Picard at the door into the nature preserve, and Picard is very salty about Wesley being wet and getting his hallway wet. Get a little comic relief here about Picard being awkward and a dick to children. Wesley and his mother talk about what a dick Picard is. His mother, again, is Dr. Crusher, who is a cast regular. And they talk about how Wesley really wants to see the bridge. He wants to see the bridge of the ship. So, again, so far, I'm not really getting why people hate this character so much. He just, so far, just seems like some 80s teenager character to me. Like, they're all the same. Like, he might as well be, like, the Karate Kid or, like, Gary or Wyatt from Weird Science or something. So then the crew is heading off to investigate Farpoint. Riker gives them their orders. Geordi and Troy and Yar are underground, and Riker and Data are topside. We get a little talk about Geordi's abilities, and Riker talks his girl Troy into opening herself up to, the emotions of the place, if you will. And then she feels pain underground, like pain and misery and sorrow. And my dude Riker's like, I'll be right there. So then Riker's not there to do his job for running interference between Picard and children, and Dr. Crusher brings her son Wesley up onto the bridge. Picard's reaction is super weird. Like, you almost think, like, Wesley is possibly Picard's kid. Like, that's what the acting leads you to believe. Like, he's so incredibly awkward, and honestly, the writing also leads me to believe that Wesley Crusher is the child of Picard. go and start that internet theory. But he comes up on the bridge, and it's just very 80s teen looking at cool shit, like The Last Starfighter type stuff, etc., etc. There's one really stylish shot where it's from, like, Wesley's point of view, and, like, he sees Picard, and Picard is like, "Hi, why don't you try out the captain's chair?" And then Picard tries to school the kid, and Wesley's like a whiz kid, and he already knows everything that he's saying. Picard gets mad that he touches something, and he's like, "Get off my bridge!" And then a big-ass ship approaches. It looks like a classic flying saucer, but kind of some weird lights on it or something. It won't respond to being hailed. Picard calls up Grappler Zorn at Farpoint and is like, "Bitch, is this the Ferengi?" And he's like, "No, it is not." A guy on the bridge says, "We've done everything but threaten them." And then the ship starts firing on the Farpoint base. This rather feels like the morality test, which was set up by Q. Alright, so Grappler Zorn begs for help from the Enterprise. And, as Riker is telling Picard that the old city is being ravaged, but mysteriously, Farpoint Station is being left alone. Picard checks in with Riker to see if they can perform an illegal kidnapping on Zorn, and, it's kind of that, like, "Oh, you gotta provide a check on me, young man," that relationship they were setting up in the earlier scene, and Riker's like, "Yeah, buddy, let's do this thing." So then Q shows up on the bridge in his, like, Alice in Wonderland Queen of Hearts outfit, and is like, "You savages don't even follow your own rules." And then he, like, makes more fun of them for not being civilized, and Picard is like, "Man, my girl Dr. Crush is already all over it, you dumb galaxy brain bitch." But then we get a shot of Riker, like, laying in the dirt, obviously because he was in the city that was being bombed by this ship, and we think he's dead, but he gets up. And then Data does, like, the Undertaker, like, sit up next to him. Or perhaps, given that this was 87 and Undertaker debuted in 90, we should say that Undertaker's been doing the Data sit-up for the past 30 years. Then the gang finds this Grappler Zorn person who says he'll explain everything eventually, after they kind of cajole him a little bit, but then he just straight up vanishes in, like, an electrical storm / beam me up kind of thing. And Riker is just wonderfully understated, where he's just like, "We've lost Zorn." And then they're back on the bridge. Troy is like, "I sense satisfaction much closer than the station." And Q is like, "Yes, nice job, counselor. Picard sure is dumb, isn't he?" And Picard gets really triggered by this, bout of trolling from Q, and he screams at Q. Side note, I love this Q character. It's kind of like this weird, like, the universe has a sense of humor. Whatever you want to say. The universe has a sense of humor. God has a sense of humor. Like, Q is like the capricious, like, backbone of the universe. Like, he's this weird, capricious troll. He's almost like this, like, Loki-style, like, trickster god. Also, he really likes and appreciates Riker, and doesn't see anything in Picard, which is really funny. Then Picard stops by Dr. Crusher's quarters, and again, it really, really feels to me like they had a kid together, and that kid's name is Wesley Crusher. Look, maybe you fans can tell me, like, if you've already thought of this. Like, I'm sure you have, but Wesley is, like, Picard's kid, right? Like, it seems so obvious to me. Like, just look at the writing of this scene in particular. It's so clear. Like, he's just, like, talking around, like, I brought your father back to base or whatever one time. And it's, I don't know, just based on the tone of the rest of the show, and just based on the actual words spoken in this scene, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Wesley Crusher is actually Wesley Picard. Alright, so Riker, Data, Troy, and Yar all beam over to that mysterious ship that was blasting away at the Farpoint station, or at least the city around it, the Bandy City. Interestingly, mysteriously, it looks exactly like the tunnels under the station, and Troy starts feeling like rage and hate towards the Bandy people who built Farpoint. Grappler Zorn among them. Riker tells Picard that there's nothing mechanical seeming about the ship, like there's no readouts or panels or buttons or whatnot. And then we hear Zorn being basically tortured, like way far off. And then when we see him, it's basically how Nebula was being held by Thanos in the last Avengers movie. So Riker and Data shoot him with their phasers, and then we cut back to Worf and Picard, and Q shows up, and he's like, "Time's up, sucker!" Q is shutting down their communication, which doesn't feel super fair to me with the whole game he's playing, but whatever. You know, he's a trickster god. We get it. Picard appeals to him and politely asks him to allow him to help his people. Allow Picard to help his people. And then Picard says he'll do whatever Q says. And then suddenly they all beam onto the bridge. But then Troy and Riker are like, no, don't do what he says. The ship sent us back, not Q. And then I think it's Troy that says, like, the ship itself is alive. And this is actually where this show's morality gets pretty interesting. Like, Q's all like, oh, God, destroy it while you can. Like, egging Picard on, like the devil on his shoulder. Like, torpedoes, full speed ahead. And then you got Grappler Zorn, who's like, oh, Captain, that thing was killing us. And Picard is like, was there a reason? Which is, I don't know, it's pretty interesting to me. It's interesting because, like, the Galactic Federation are, like, by far this dominant force in the galaxy, and yet we have this technologically inferior race, the Bandi, who were up to something nefarious, and Picard is just like, well, sorry, dude, maybe your people deserve to get wasted, Zorn. Like, I'm not staking out a position here, I'm just saying, like, the moral implications are interesting. Like, yeah, like, the Grappler Zorn dude probably really sucks, but not all his people were probably complicit. But in any case, then Grappler Zorn confesses. Riker makes the connection that, matter into energy and energy into matter. It's probably pretty much a two-way street. And if there's aliens that can do one, they can probably also do the other. And then someone's all like, on the viewer, Captain! And then the big ship turns into a jellyfish. I'm sorry. That's what happens. It turns into a jellyfish. So it turns out Grappler Zorn captured the space jellyfish, and Troy realizes it was two creatures, and we see like a blue and pink space jellyfish. Picard tells the Bandi to evacuate, to his credit, dare I say it. Q is a very sore loser, and he's all like, oh, I was being easy on your dumb primate brain, you loser. And Picard gives what energy he can to Farpoint Station, which turns out to be the mate of the space jellyfish. The one that's in space, literally Farpoint Station, is its mate. It's just pretending to be a space station. Grappler Zorn begs Picard's forgiveness, and he ain't having it, as the blue space jellyfish flies up into space. I know that one's the boy, 'cause it's blue. And then the space jellyfish lovers like touch tentacles, and I am 1000% certain this is where James Cameron got the idea for Avatar. Even Deanna Troi likes it. The psychic lady is feeling happy as all hell. But Q is mad as hell, and he and Picard bicker a bit. It's a fun relationship. You know, I can see why the fans like it. You know, Q says he'll probably be back. This does not surprise me. And then we get a captain's log stating that Picard will rebuild Farpoint, but probably in a way that does not enslave godlike jellyfish. And then Picard says, let's see what's out there. Engage. So yeah, episode 1 in the books. I loved it. I really loved it. How do I count the ways? Really wonderful writing, great characters, great story, almost kind of like a simple, like, Murder, She Wrote, Agatha Christie type of story, but with these different characters in this different setting, like, it just kind of worked, and just the writing was so subtle and so, you know, kind of intricate in certain ways, like it just kind of worked. It's a great episode of television, and I understand completely why people fell in love with this show. I'm looking forward to seeing more shows, you know, in the very immediate future. And now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. Yes, the video's over. The review of the Star Trek episode is over. If you watched this entire episode, or if you watched even a piece of it, and even if you cut in just right now, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I'm not going to say all that silly YouTube crap that people say you're supposed to say. I enjoyed this episode of television, and I'm going to enjoy carrying on with this project. In any case, until next time, I am the world-renowned historian. Be good, kiddos. I am out.